AI shouldn't improve CX, it should replace it. What did you mean by that?
Channels today has a tendency to be very fragmented.
Is the risk of hallucination still a real risk, or is it largely a solved problem?
What we have seen the last 6 months is that 20-30% has become now 60 and 70%, and we actually have some customers doing 75% automation. We all know it's super easy to set up an LLM bot. So you will sometimes have people from the IT teams just build up something. Hey, we just scrape the web page, scrape a knowledge base, we build a RAG, we launch it, and we're good to go. We don't need to do anything more. But as we know, if you really want to kind of push the envelope of what's possible in this technology, you really need to have the business, the CX, the contact center people in. How can they be ready for the future when everyone has their own AI, and then it doesn't really cost me any money to have my own voice bot to call your voice bot.
So it was like two agents talking to each other. So it's happening now, you know? This conversation is with Henry Vaage Iversen, who is the CCO and co-founder at boost.ai. Boost.ai is a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader, one of the players in the conversational AI for enterprise space. And this conversation is all about the kind of rising trend around voice AI. Despite what you might think, after all the investment in digital native channels, in automation, in mobile, in web, the call volumes in contact centers are still rising. And weirdly, I don't know why, we speak about why actually, so I do know why now, but the voice AI adoption has really started to take off in businesses. I mean, the technology was kind of there 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but what large language models and generative AI has done is they've made these conversations really natural. So this conversation with Henry is all about how do you really maximize voice AI? How do you approach going from an AI agent that you have on a chat channel, putting it into the voice channel? What differences need to be considered? What kind of things do you need to change? How do you need to test it? What does good look like? And how do you then go ahead and scale it? So if you're interested in voice AI, if you're interested in taking advantage of finally what I've been talking about since 2017, which is the voice AI revolution and the value of voice AI for your business, this conversation is one that you should absolutely pay attention to. Henry knows his stuff. He's incredibly experienced in this space. He's got over a decade of experience working with this type of technology in the creation of Boost AI. Boost AI, I'm a big fan of. It is a great platform, great company, great people, great culture. And so this conversation, I'm sure you'll enjoy with Henry Vaage Iversen from Boost AI. All right, Henry, welcome back, I should say.
Thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, you joined us on, we had a chat a few months back when the whole Cognigy kind of acquisition happened. You joined us on a panel, sharing some great insights. So glad to speak to you properly again. Yeah.
Good to see you again. It feels like a lifetime, to be honest, but
I bet
it's moving pretty fast in our industry.
It is moving fast. It is indeed. And Boost is on the up and up. I saw something recently. Was it a Forrester Wave or something like that? Where Boost was featured in. I can't remember exactly what it was. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, we're featuring a lot of stuff though. But obviously we are a leader in the Magic Quadrant. So. Yeah. And then there is also a lot of other analysts where we've been featured as a leader. So obviously great to be recognized by the analysts as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think kind of like Boost has definitely kind of emerged and established itself as like a real sort of like front runner in this space when it comes to conversational AI. You know, I think obviously you've got a good pedigree and, you know, building the company and really sort of like capitalizing on the Nordics and stuff like that. But I'd definitely say in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, Boost is, I would say, up there with the establishment in terms of like a real serious player in the AI space.
Yeah, for sure. And we are kind of born in a bank, actually. So I think it's kind of our success has definitely been our focus on the regulated industries, which obviously include a lot within the financial services, but also a government, telcos, but also in general, everyone which has a complex need when it comes to customer service and CX. So I think that's kind of been our sweet spot. Is obviously we love the complexity. And I think that's something our customers really appreciate working with us.
Yeah. What do regulated industries pose in terms of a challenge then in particular compared to non-regulated industries?
Yeah, so I think obviously like nowadays, like building an LLM bot, it's kind of a commodity. I think all of us can build something. You can. There's a lot of tools you can use. External facing, basically just kind of create something pretty quickly. But then obviously when you work with the bank, work with an insurance company, they have certain kind of ways of working. There's obviously one thing you need to think about is just the whole aspect of like governance. How do you track what you do in the solution? How do you make sure that you monitor changes, monitor maintenance, development, and also improvements over time? Things like privacy, security is obviously also extremely important, and we kind of gone through all the certification in terms of ISO. The latest one was HIPAA we added, so those things are also super important. So we definitely make sure that if you're an organization in regulated industries like with us, you can trust every conversation. So basically, you are able to serve your customers at the highest level of quality, but then there's also opportunity for you as a customer to have an audit trail on everything which has happened in the conversation. So it's not really a black box, because again, a lot of the stuff you can develop yourself. If you build an LLM bot, that will very much be a black box.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, isn't it, with LLMs sometimes. I mean, they've gotten better in terms of kind of trying to explain their reasoning. Certainly, if you look at your likes of Claude, and when I say Claude, I mean the more consumer-facing applications. And I think that's probably part of that kind of trust thing, isn't it? You know, like helping the user understand what it's done and how it's gone through what it's done type of thing. But ultimately, fundamentally, they are still a black box in terms of like, you can't necessarily understand exactly why it's predicted the tokens it's predicted. But at least in a platform like Boost, presumably you can get visibility into the pipeline and in terms of like what's happened where and when, and ultimately be able to pinpoint if anything has gone wrong, where it has gone wrong and stuff like that, is it?
Yeah, and it's fundamental, very different use cases, because obviously as a consumer, I can live with it. It's a black box as long as it's useful. I can live, it's not 100% every time I ask a question. That's good enough, because obviously it's creating a lot of value for me regardless. But I think if you're a bank and insurer, you definitely want to make sure that every conversation you have is trusted in the sense that you actually deliver the level of quality you want. Because if you give a wrong quote, for example, maybe you hallucinate a product you don't have, for example, maybe you give people a financial advice. Those things obviously is not really something any one of our customers will accept, because things will basically make the headline at some point if it happens.
Yeah.
So I think hallucination is obviously still a key part of LLMs, I would say, but we need to be able to reduce that as much as possible, because that's definitely not a good customer experience for sure.
Yeah. How much of a problem is hallucinations these days then? Because if you look at your likes of Claude and ChatGPT and those kind of, again, different use cases, but the consumer-facing stuff, they do tend to have hiccups every now and then, but they're an awful lot better than they were. Whereas when you're working with the API, you're not always working with the same kind of layers of guardrails and all that kind of stuff that those applications have. So what's your sort of perspectives now on, like, is the risk of hallucination still a real risk, or is it largely a solved problem?
I would definitely say it's still a big risk. I think for the consumer-facing one, what I learned using the tool, I obviously use AI a lot. They tend to want to please you.
Yeah.
So for example, I'm very keen of running, so I'm coming back from injury now. And then if I have any kind of good progress in the injury, then I will obviously ask the LLM just to see, okay, how I'm tracking on this injury right now. Can I increase the volume of running now since I'm feeling better? And then depending on how I ask the question, it will come back with very different response, because obviously you want to please me. If I'm very cautious when asking, maybe I need to be a bit more cautious there. I say, yes, of course, you are totally right. You need to be cautious there. On the other side, saying, hey, I have a race next week. It's a good idea. And I have not practiced it for it. Yeah, it's probably going to be stretched. We probably can get you there. So I think it's still a challenge. But I think when it comes to kind of businesses, when you serve on customer service, you don't really have that type of conversation. So every conversation will be very much dedicated to one use case. You have kind of one problem you want to solve. So then it's obviously much easier to put guardrails on it. And at Boost, we have basically, we're done a bit unique in terms of guardrail. We're not building in guardrails in the instruction. We actually have separate LLMs monitoring the conversation. So as you go as part of the conversation, there's actually going to be numerous different LLMs monitoring the conversation to come in and kind of grab that conversation and then have obviously an escalation on that if needed. So that means that I'm not going to say it's going to be 0 chance of hallucination, but you're getting pretty close to 0% of hallucination, which is obviously a good thing.
That's brilliant, yeah, because that was the big prohibitor for a long time, I think, really. I saw on your LinkedIn a week or so ago, you were giving a talk somewhere and you had a slide behind you that said AI shouldn't improve CX, it should replace it. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think as we work with a lot of organizations, we have also learned that a lot of organizations kind of tend to want to improve the existing customer experience. So especially when it comes to banks, they had a lot of forms. They obviously have invested a lot of money in self-service, mobile banks, and so on. And the problem with these also, it becomes kind of a channel which is obviously not easy to use, because obviously with all the stuff you want to put into it, there's going to be a lot of complexity in terms of menus and how you want to navigate. And then people tend to how can we use AI to make those better? Because a lot of people have historically then used AI to steer people into the mobile bank, maybe steer them into a self-service tool. But I think where we come from is I think you basically need to redesign everything. Because if you try to build AI on legacy, yes, sure, you're going to get some short-term results of doing that for sure. But I think if you look at the longer picture and also looking at the potential of AI technology, I think you need to start rethinking a lot, but also start rethinking channels as a whole. Because again, channels today has a tendency to be very fragmented. You can start a conversation somewhere, continue another one. It's not really kind of collecting any context or any of that history. And again, I think the promise for me, at least for AI, is basically it's representing a completely new UI, where you can then obviously talk to it or write to it, and it doesn't really matter which channel you are in. I think that's kind of the premise of the promise of the technology, which I think very few, to be honest, has really kind of go into. But I think we are now getting much more customers kind of buying into that vision and start rethinking how they do things today.
Yeah, which ultimately is what it's all about, isn't it? It's AI really is a transformative technology, and it kind of pains me a little bit when I come across them use cases, which is we've got all of these documents. Let's just, the term that started to really bug me is just talk to our data. We just want to talk to our data. It's do your customers just want to talk to your data? Really? Your customers want to get something done, and that data is probably actually going to prevent them from doing the thing they're trying to do. And it kind of, who was it? I can't remember who it was I spoke to recently that was talking about how sometimes AI taking the place of a phone call, if it does nothing else but just replace the phone call, then the business still hasn't really gained, because the phone call still happens. The person who used to answer that phone call is still there, still doing the job, and work takes up the time that they have. So unless it's going to actually do as you say and actually transform something, get into the process, help you reorchestrate the process, re-engineer how you deliver value, re-engineer how you serve customers, so rather than it being one channel, it's every channel. And rather than it being a front end lipstick on a pig doing the UI, it's actually orchestrating the actual process. That's when it starts to become more valuable, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think also to your point, when something goes kind of the customer journey within an organization is pretty much you know what they need. They will go into your webpage, discover your product. They will obviously investigate in terms of your product compared with others. There's obviously kind of the whole purchasing, buying the product, but then also kind of when you kind of bought it, the after sales and so on. As an organization, you know all these things, and you should also be able to know when Henry needs support before actually Henry reaching out. I think that's also some of the things people are also overlooking a bit, because you are thinking about contact centers more like as a traditional department. It's kind of inbound. We're waiting till people get a problem, and then we solve it in the best possible way. But the challenge with that model is, to your point, to say the volumes is not going down. It's actually going up. Yeah, the volumes is going up. And I think if you look at phone calls, I think for 10 years ago, we were very much hey, phone, no one's going to call anymore, because obviously now we can do messaging. The phone calls are pretty stable, and that obviously depends a lot on the region, of course. But even in the Nordics, where things are very much digital and kind of messaging, phone calls are still the biggest channel. So I think that's kind of something people really overlook, like the ability to be more proactive in the customer journey and having kind of one-to-one relationship with customers at scale, which is also, I think, is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But that needs a rethink, I think, from the whole organization to go in that direction, because if you think about contact center and reducing cost there, this is obviously a completely different kind of use case in that sense.
Yeah, but ultimately that's how a business actually becomes better, though, isn't it? So the kind of, the whole like 5 whys process, isn't it? If you follow that down to try and get to the root cause of why someone's contacting, and then address the root cause, and if you can't address the root cause, preempt the root cause, is all that kind of stuff. Like, people are not calling because they want to, they're calling because of a reason that something's happened. So why has that happened? Or something failed here. Well, why has that failed? Or because of something, or why has that happened? If you keep kind of peeling back the layers, that's how you end up actually solving the problem, rather than just trying to replace the interaction.
Yeah. And I think I completely agree. And this is also kind of where the whole trust part also plays a very significant role, because both on the end customer side, they need to have trust in these systems. Like if you talk to an AI, you need to have trust. Does it take care of my data in the proper way? Does it kind of abuse any of my data? Does it really understand me in the end? Like, because obviously things are also very contextual. Things could also change. I can have data about Henry, or can have data about you, Kane, but obviously we also change as people. So how do we make sure we update that? So that's one part of it, but also organization really kind of start utilizing this, really need to be able to understand and trust these systems. So this, again, kind of being able to have that transparency in the solution is just extremely important, because you need to figure out how the AI come to conclusion, how the AI actually responded, where it fetched information, and how can I build up the logic. If you're not able to give that out for every conversation, then it's going to be very difficult to do any of the things we talk about now.
Yeah, 100%. Where do you stand on stuff like computer use and those type of technologies? So again, on the consumer side, those tend to make sense because, having an AI like Claude or OpenClaw or whatever use your computer in your absence to do stuff makes kind of sense. But or use the browser, navigate to a website in your browser. That all makes sense for me, at least, because you're not in control of any of that. I can't go and just make booking.com give me an API that I can authenticate with my user and then pass that to Claude. I can't do that. But a business at least has, at least on the face of it, more control. So I'm kind of caught in two worlds. I'd be interested in getting your perspective on stuff like computer use and stuff like that. Is that something that can really unlock value for a business on the back end, or is that just papering over a crack in lieu of an API or a more efficient way of building systems?
Yeah, so you mean kind of having your own kind of personal kind of AI, then talking to an organization's AI?
No. I meant, like, for example, let's say that there's a business that has been blocked on some kind of initiative because they don't have an API access to this system. And instead what they'll have like a boost agent on the front end that then triggers a process that, because they don't have APIs, they'll use this other technologies that's emerging, like computer use, in order to navigate some of their back office systems. Yeah, because I'm hearing a lot of that lately, and businesses like, oh, that'd be really useful for us because it could just do this type of thing. So, like, I don't know, there's a lot of businesses now who are wondering about that technology, whether they could be using it internally. But for me, I'm not sure whether that's the right thing to do, because surely you should fix the problem, which is your data and your connectivity to that data,
Yeah, it definitely seems like these organizations have some kind of legacy systems, but also not being able to kind of pull out the data when you need it. And I think that's probably also the reality of a lot of organizations. That's just obviously also the thing, though. Like, if you have that challenge, and I think we're also seeing something similar. I think you have a lot of banks, a lot of insurance also have a lot of like legacy systems, which is not really easy to connect to. So then you just need to figure out how we can use AI to kind of extract information from that and kind of use it in the conversation. But I think in general, if you are able to rethink it, that's obviously the best way to go. But I can definitely see the case of kind of doing something in the meantime if you want to get things up and running. But let's make sure we don't focus too much on that solution. I think that's the end product, because I think that would definitely be a trap.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned there that the voice channel is kind of remained stable. I actually come across some research that I couldn't properly get into the source of it, but it was a company. I don't think it was a CCAS company, but it was something similar to that. who did a study of X 100 businesses and profiled their voice kind of demand. And I would say that it's anecdotal because again I couldn't find the source of the data. I just saw it in the article from the company that did the study, and I'll try and dig it out and put it in the show notes. But it was suggesting actually that the opposite, not the opposite, but it was suggesting that voice is actually growing as a channel in terms of demand, which is totally counter to what you would expect given the investment in digital and mobile and all that kind of stuff. And so at the same time though, it feels like for me, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but it seems like it's taken a while for businesses to really kind of realize that if the voice channel is growing, AI is a perfect fit for that channel, especially now with LLM. So I don't know what you're seeing now. And I've done this a few times. We did a webinar with Boost with Sam Rosendorf last year about voice AI, and we spoke a little bit about the trends. It feels as though everyone's got really interested in voice AI in 2026, but it's hard to tell whether is that just noise and hype, or is that actually translating to deployment? So what are you seeing from your customers in terms of voice AI adoption?
I would definitely say that most of our kind of major customers are definitely going into voice now. Some of them obviously have launched already, and some of them in pilot, proof of concept, but I think they all really much think about it. I think, again, the US market, which is a bit different, they've definitely been on that train for like maybe 3 or 4 years, I think. When I definitely seeing Europe now starting to catch up. And I think there's also been some limitation in terms of English compared to some of the other languages, including the Nordics and Slovenian and stuff like that. But I also saw some benchmark now in terms of like how well these models have improved over the last year, because I don't think there's been a lack of interest around voice, especially in some of the countries in Europe, but it's just been honestly a bit lack of kind of the capabilities of the speech to text. And now we obviously have a lot of new voice models coming out, speech to speech and so on, which again creating a much better natural conversation. But I would say most of the customers we get in now, they will have voice as part of that project, most of them, which is obviously a significant uptick for than just a couple of years ago when we talked about maybe 20% of customers were doing voice. Now most of them are doing it.
That's brilliant.
So I think we are going to continue seeing a significant investment in voice, and people have a bit different perspective where they want to start. Again, it's very easy to take in traditional IVR, kind of just rip it out and then do more kind of intelligent routing. So basically have a much natural conversation. Things like authentication of the user. It's also very useful using AI. Like we have customers like spending maybe up to 1 minute per conversation just to authenticate the user. And we start adding kind of some of these things. It obviously creates a very healthy business case. But again, the coolest stuff you can do is obviously then when you can do end-to-end automation. So you start the conversation, authenticate the user, and then you kind of follow out the whole conversation on voice. So I think we probably predicted that there's going to be 2025, 2024 is going to be kind of the year of voice, but I think 2026 is definitely where we've seen a significant uptick for sure.
Interesting. What do you think is behind that then? Do you think it's kind of like the models have all of a sudden got better? Is it that awareness has now got to such a degree that people are now kind of getting comfortable with it? Like, what do you think is the catalyst behind that growth in voice AI?
So I think there's a few things. I think first of all, there is for sure some new vendors coming into the market. We have a lot of local vendors. We have Speechmatics. We have 11 Labs. We have a lot of companies outside kind of the usual Microsoft and Google, which has invested a lot in this technology. And they have all their kind of like pros and cons in terms of strengths, in terms of industries and language and so on. They have definitely created a lot of innovation in this space. That's for sure. But then I also think it's about kind of the maturity around how people evolve AI within the organization has also changed a lot. Remember when we started like the Boost like 10 years ago, like we sold the chatbot, it was bolted onto your contact center. We didn't kind of really get into kind of the wider ecosystem at start because again, we are kind of a new channel, people are like super excited about it. But then like as we have gone gradually, we've been more and more key part of the whole contact center CX. But now people, again, have done chat, they have done messaging, they have really been able to utilize AI in customer service, especially, but also internally. So now they're obviously looking for something more to automate and also make better. And what is interesting is also to see, like, it's not all about automation, but also being able to create a better experience. Because mostly in most contact center across the globe, there's queue. So just being able to have something which is more scalable is obviously super useful. So that's definitely some of the things we have seen being key part of kind of the wave of new voice projects. So you will see this now, but also in the coming months and year, that there's going to be a lot of new deployments coming out.
Good. That's really good. I remember a while ago, there was a couple of vendors, I won't name names, but they were kind of like, in order to sort of like try and really sort of get voice AI off the ground, their kind of position was voice enable your chatbot. Just stick kind of like speech to text and text to speech on top of your chatbot, stick it on a phone line, and you've got yourself a voice bot. And at the time, you know, if you're working with NLU, it wasn't as simple as that, because people spoke differently to how they typed, and so the model wouldn't always be the same model. And then also the responses needed to be different, because people's attention span are a lot shorter on voice than they are over chat. On chat, you can have UI affordances like tables and images and stuff like that. In voice, you can't. So it was always quite a challenge to just take an existing chatbot and simply kind of voiceify it, so to speak. With large language models now and the way that kind of like these applications are built, is that becoming more feasible in your estimation, or is it still best practice to create a separate instance and a separate agent for the voice channel?
I would definitely say that it's become much easier. I think just in general, building this agent, even on messaging, is so much easier now when you have the help of the different LLM engines. I think when it comes to voice and chat, as you said, like two very different channels, so they have significant differences. I also think when it comes to voice, it's like people get very hung up on details on voice. I think if you get a response on chat, it's kind of very much like either you got what you wanted, it's binary, you're happy or not. I think in voice, you kind of look for the latency, how quick it is. You look at the voice, how it pronounces certain things. And if something is off, you will immediately notice it. So people, I think in general, are very picky when it comes to voice, which is obviously, which also makes it a good reason to do some more work on voice for sure. So I think even if you can reuse a lot of the stuff you do on kind of messaging and chat into voice more than before, I would definitely say it's definitely beneficial to think about how you actually create that experience. Maybe you need to add some certain words, maybe how it pronounce things. There could obviously be a ton of different dialects. When you write, especially in most countries, you kind of write in a similar way. But when you talk very differently. So that also kind of come with some complication that you actually need to be able to kind of then fine tune it and train it for that certain language, that dialect and so on. So yes, in short, it's become definitely much easier, but would definitely recommend to spend more time building out the voice journeys for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, that's a good observation, which is that people are a lot more picky with voice, because I am very pedantic when it comes to voice. Is like, you know, and those two things don't really go together in the LLM world. Like, you can't be so hung up over detail because you ultimately don't have total control over it. So it's like getting the voice right is one thing. So that's a really important step. Getting the tonality in terms of how it pronounces things is also a step, but also the specific words it says. And that's the challenge, is that sometimes when it's just generating text, you might have a call and it's perfect. It's just got everything right. But then the next call, it might not say the same sentence in the same way. It might not feel, it's a feeling, isn't it? It doesn't quite feel the same. So I don't know if you've got any sort of like, I don't know, observations or recommendations in terms of like, how do you make the voice UI more consistent in a probabilistic kind of landscape?
Yeah. And I think to your observation, like we also see the same thing, that like depending on what type of model you use, again, with voice, there is so much more components involved in that conversation flow. Like there's a lot of steps you go through. So you can also imagine when you especially do end to end, like you need to go into the CRM system, you need to authenticate the user, you need to update some information, you need to pull out some information, present that, like things which obviously in a chat and messaging also can be complicated. But again, when it comes to voice, it becomes even more complicated, because then you don't really have time to pull out that information. You don't really have time to say, hey, hold on, we are fetching some information. Even if the human also takes some time though to fetch information. But I think one way you can definitely tackle a lot of those challenges is basically to be able to test things. So in Boost, we have kind of very extensive testing tools, meaning that before we go into production, you're actually able to test out all the different scenarios, looking at, okay, if the user was angry, if different sentiments, maybe there's some dialects, so you can really kind of get a feel of the whole experience, but also do that multiple times. Because as you said, like maybe it works perfectly one time, but then obviously second time is a bit different. So being able to kind of run ideally hundreds of thousands of different simulations, and then you can see if there are things you need to do changes on. I think it's going to be difficult to have like the exact same result every time. So I also hope the customer also can be a bit less picky sometimes and also think about like, okay, if I get the support I need, this is a good experience overall, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And obviously things will also become better over time for sure. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. I mean, compared to NLU, what would you rather have? Something that can understand everything and respond to everything, even if it can't satisfy the need, at least it can respond to you and have an actual conversation, but it might not get things exactly right in terms of how it pronounces everything. Or something that doesn't understand 9 out of 10 or 3 out of 10 things that you say. You would rather sacrifice a bit of control for the whole conversation rather than the rigidity and not understanding everything from the NLU side,
Yeah. But the beauty in the Boost platform, you can actually go in and fine tune a lot of these things. And that's also kind of thing where you will spend a bit more extra time than you would doing kind of more chat messaging, that you can really fine tune those things. And I think it's going to be a journey for most companies. I think for me, like the recommendation is always like, how can we get started? You can get started kind of late in one of the menus, find one specific use case and do that really well. Or you can take the route where you can basically do routing and start with kind of the topics, but then you also always route a human in the first instance. And that's also a good way of kind of building up the model you need. And then it's going to be kind of like make sure that you do that necessary kind of evolvement of the solution, looking at conversations, having the AI to test it out, improve it, and also kind of all. So the sum of all these kind of details will definitely make sure that you have a good experience for sure.
And how do you approach the testing of the voice channel? Do you care about testing the speech recognition, the speech generation, or do you kind of bypass the telephony and the voice stuff and you just test the model, text in, text out? How do you approach the testing?
So we do a lot of testing on our own, just to make sure that we have the best practices and also the best models we can recommend for customers. So typical in a project, you will, especially when you go into some of the non-English countries, you definitely need to see who is the best vendor. Sometimes there's some local vendor, sometimes there's some of the bigger ones, and we also need to see how much you can actually customize that model for the customer. So sometimes Microsoft can offer something which is not like amazing out of the gate, but then you also have the possibility to fine tune it, and then you can obviously get it to where you need to get it. But we also do. We actually create voice agents. So the voice agent basically then call the voice agent you are going to have for your customers.
Right.
So it's basically simulating kind of a real conversation. And that kind of gives you a very good idea on like different profile of the customer. We can look at different age, how they talk and so on. And that would be basically something we just call in directly to the voice agent. And then that will definitely generate results we can have a look at afterwards.
Nice. And what is it that you're looking for when you make the voice call? So like when you spin up a voice agent and you have it make a call to the one that you've just built and you have that simulated call, what's the difference between doing that versus kind of skipping the voice channel entirely and just having a text agent have a text conversation with the back end of your voice agent, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely things like latency is very important in that sense. That could also be just in terms of like, there's also differences in terms of like how we actually understand kind of the intent of the user, Obviously in voice, the conversation will also have more turns. I think on messaging is very much you say something and then you predict something, get something back. Obviously in voice, the conversation is more fluid in the sense that it continue, and then you have some, yes, please repeat it, and so on. I think just the conversation flow in itself there's more to analyze in that sense than on chat or messaging, which I feel it's very often very much more direct, which obviously voice, where you actually engage with customer, are a bit different. And then you also need to be able to tackle all the, let's say, the small talks and the things you also do outside just asking for that specific question. That's also a key part of the experience.
Yeah. What are some of the, so for someone who is, they've got an AI agent, it's a chat-based kind of thing, they're looking to kind of move into voice, maybe, it's becoming a bit clearer that they might not be able to just lift and shift things. What are some of the key things that need to change? You mentioned latency on voice, that's a big consideration. What are the other sort of like real key considerations that you need to take into account to get the voice AI right?
I think testing is very important, because what we learned is also like a conversation which works perfectly on chat or messaging doesn't necessarily work perfectly on voice. Because again, there could be things like if you want to extract information from the user, and then that information needs to be like you need to write in, for example, numbers or maybe an address, for example. On some cases, I say the voice is very good of extracting a lot of that information, but in some cases it's also hard for the customer to pronounce some of these, like if you go to Finland, for example, some of these kind of like street names of like 30 characters. So it's not that easy for the voice to understand. So in those cases, you actually need to think about the whole experience though. Like, does it make sense to have it on voice, everything? Or can we think a bit more multimodality? So maybe we can actually kind of combine those, so we can actually have the conversation on a voice, but then we can also use a messaging or chat interface to kind of put in things like address, things we know is going to be super hard for the voice bot to understand. So I still think there is certain things where I don't think it makes sense necessarily to do it on voice. We can do most of the things, but I think there is some things which is a bit harder to do. So I think just looking at the customer experience, how that would look like, because as you said, like you're not able to give links, you're not able to give forms, you're not able to give images and things like that, which is still very much used in the chat and messaging world. And then you need to translate that to voice. So basically the content will be quite different in some cases. But again, if it's just an answer, then you can obviously reuse the text pretty much.
That's interesting. So, like how, the routing example is a great example, because that's a kind of fairly shallow use case in terms of like, that conversation to get to the right agent might be like a number of turns, but it's not going to go on forever. There might be cases where, maybe the UI is important, so you might want to kind of devolve to a different channel if you need to submit documents and stuff like that. That seemingly sounds like it might be a problem on voice. I'm wondering whether kind of like, given the power of LLMs now, is it feasible to, what am I trying to say? I suppose I'm trying to get to like, how complicated a use case can we really tackle on voice? In terms, I was looking recently at like government-based use cases, and there's like, blue badge applications and bus pass application and driving license renewals and this. And yeah, fair enough, those things might require you to submit documents, but really they're kind of just forms. And there's loads of things like income and expenditure forms in like debt collection, and like insurance quotation forms or claim forms. All those things that are just forms that were a nightmare to do with NLU, because it's just too hard to class it. Even though you're just essentially slot filling in some cases, it's very difficult to sort of do. LLMs, with the power of language capabilities that they have now, where do you stand in terms of like, how complicated and sophisticated can we get in terms of end-to-end automation on the voice channel, do you think?
Yeah. So I think there's a number we kind of monitor with our customers, which I think is very, which give a good answer on that. Because again, when we started a lot of the voice project, if you look away from kind of, I think, routing, but also just looking at the whole use case, like if we do tackle everything a customer can do on voice, we typically saw maybe 20 to 30% automation. So when we talk about automation, it's basically containment, or you're actually able to resolve that conversation or that question for the customer. So that's kind of how we define automation here. So that's calls not going into the contact center. What we have seen the last 6 months is that 20-30% has become now 60 and 70%, and we actually have some customers doing 75% automation. You can imagine 75% automation of all your incoming phones. That's a pretty big number.
That's a huge number.
And yes, there's for sure there's going to be some more calls coming in. So sometimes it's difficult to have a 75% reduction in incoming because some of the more complex questions will get through. So those will take more time. I think also when you have a channel which is more available and driven by AI, you will in general get more volume. So the volume will naturally just grow a bit, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But when you're looking at 60 to 70% automation in voice, I think it definitely tells a pretty interesting picture where we can actually go. And we have some customers where we basically then decide, okay, where do we want to be in 3 years' time? So in 3 years' time, we want to make sure that we can reduce cost of customer service by 50%. We also want to increase the NPS score by 10 points, for example, at the same time. So basically, better experience, lower waiting time, creating more revenue, but then also obviously reducing the cost. So that's possible today. So I think, where are we going to end up with that number? I don't think we're going to get to 100% any day soon, but I definitely expect that number to continue to climb as we go forward.
That's wicked. I mean, 75% is huge. You know, even if it's 75% of one use case within a suite of use cases, at least that problem becomes very much a solved problem, which is brilliant. Yeah. What's your observations now on terms of like in the NLU days? You know, it was quite challenging to build these systems because first of all, you had to have someone who is more akin to a machine learning engineer, not necessarily to that level of depth, but someone who knows how to train a model, getting a good type of training data, making sure that it's all kind of like decent data, training the model, testing the model, all that kind of stuff. Then you had to have a conversation designer who could plan out and map out the conversation and all that kind of stuff. And so you had to have, you know, skill sets that were very hard to come by because conversation design is a very unique practice. NLU modeling is a very unique practice, and putting it all together with your kind of customer experience lens and all that kind of stuff, it's all quite a kind of unique sort of skill set. LLMs have opened up access to this technology far beyond what NLU ever did. Anyone now can access an API, and even if you don't work with APIs, you can work with Claude Code and it can build your stuff these days. So like the access to the technology is far greater. But it seems to me at least that still it's not just a case of grabbing an LLM and building a chatbot. To build something that's actually robust, and as you said at the beginning, something that's like regulatory sound and provides a good experience and has low latency and is consistent over time, that's still not something that is a trivial kind of activity. So I wonder what your kind of thoughts are and what you've observed in your clients in terms of like, what is the maturity level of organizations like now? Is it heading in the right direction in terms of businesses are beginning to build the right capabilities to be able to do this stuff themselves? Are you still having to do a lot of this work yourself? Like, how's the maturity of organizations now in terms of their AI competency?
So it's definitely increasing a lot. So I think in general, we're seeing much more educated people, so educated buyers. They definitely know their stuff, and people are setting up their AI hubs. They're putting up a lot of initiatives. AI is obviously a board discussion. CEOs want to do AI. So that's definitely very important. In the sense of kind of the capabilities you need to have to actually kind of build out a fantastic experience, I think you're definitely spot on that you still need someone really understanding the CX world of it. And I think this is also maybe where I see a lot of organizations, some organizations at least go into kind of be trapped that we all know it's super easy to set up an LLM bot. So you will sometimes have people from the IT teams just build up something. Hey, we just scrape the web page, scrape a knowledge base, we build a RAG, we launch it, and we're good to go. We don't need to do anything more. But as we know, if you really want to kind of push the envelope to what's possible in this technology, you really, really need to have the business, the CX, the contact center people in. And when we started the company, we focused, we said to ourselves, we don't want our platform to be used by technical people. We want people to be retrained from customer service. So that was a bit unique take on that. And that's something we also kind of continued. to this day. But it also, to your point, like evolved a bit in terms of what is the skill set of this person. Because before, you need to build training data, a lot of tedious, boring work you don't really need to do anymore. Like the generative AI really helps you. So I think now it's more, how I look at our solution is that you kind of log in, the AI will proactively kind of nudge you. Okay, there's certain things you need to look at here. Here is things I've tested. Okay, how can we make sure we can improve that for next time? So you, as a human, need to understand the conversation. You need to understand the business, because you also need to be able to kind of figure out, how do I pull that information? What is the architecture? Because you can imagine now we are using information from the whole organization. So we're pulling information from the CRM system. We're pulling from a SharePoint or other knowledge sources. So there's also some architecture in terms of how you build that out. How do you fetch information? But then again, how do I create that amazing experience? How do I make sure they like the customer? Don't ask them too many questions. How can I make sure that I populate the conversation with as much information I has about the user as possible? So I think in general, the role has changed a lot from just doing all the boring, tedious things to build out to now having less people on the team, for sure. I think you can do more now with less team, but again, focus on the experience part. I think that's where you're going to win customers.
Interesting. Where do you stand in terms of kind of like, in terms of where this is going and where this is heading? For me, it's always seemed as though you're going to need those skills and those activities that you just highlighted. It seems to me, at least, that businesses are going to always need that, because they're going to be building new use cases. They need to be optimizing existing use cases. There's a whole kind of raft of things you need to do to make really great experiences at scale. But at the same time, you've got other companies that their kind of market position is, our goal really is to basically take as much off your plate as possible. And our technology is going to be very opinionated in terms of what it does. And all you need to do, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, is just give us your APIs and give us your data, and it's as good as a solved problem. So you kind of have like, what I would say Boost would be kind of like that platform company, orchestrating company, where essentially you can build your stuff and you can have total control and you can build what you want. Whereas you have other companies that have more kind of, they've specifically taken up that position in the market, which is, this stuff is a lot easier and more trivial than you might think. Just give us your data and give us your APIs. Do you see that? I don't know. Does that have merit at all? For me, this is a bit of a loaded question, but for me, that seems a bit short-sighted and a little bit like you're only going to get so far with it. But obviously, you're a lot closer to the technology than I am. So I don't know what your position is on the future of building agents.
I think if your focus is only the bottom line, you just want to do things as cheap as possible. Sure, that's definitely a viable strategy. I don't think that's kind of where you're going to win customer. That's not where you're going to win market share. But I think like the customer experience, it's extremely important. Like every brand we interact with, there is an element of customer experience to it. There is how we feel and touch that brand is extremely important. And I think especially now in the days we are right now, it's going to be even more important. And I think we're already seeing now a lot of like AI slopping out there, like people producing slides or whatever, like writing stuff on LinkedIn. Like there's a lot of things which you can definitely see a sense in coming from an AI, which I don't think, like I can almost see it immediately when I see a presentation. Okay, this is created by Claude. Okay, fine, it looks great. The content is pretty good, but it doesn't really stand out. So I think for me, there's going to be a merit that there's going to be companies which use humans to think creatively about like how we can build a brand and the feel of it, and that is still going to have value. I don't think the AI is going to be able to think out of the box in that same way for a certain brand. So I think that touch to it is going to be crucial.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I think it's interesting how like nostalgia works. I think that the timeline of nostalgia is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, which is that like, when COVID came around, I know this is a common reference, but when COVID came around, everyone was locked down, everyone's in the houses, all that kind of stuff. And then as soon as it kind of finished, it was almost like nostalgic to kind of create some sort of event where everyone gets back together again and is in person type of thing. And you're already seeing a little bit of that in the market, which is that some companies, like I think it was Klarna fairly recently, was like, we're not going to stop you speaking to our people, and trying to use like the fact that you're always going to be able to talk to a person as like the differentiator. For me, I think it's a little bit too early for that to be a differentiator. I think that we're still well and truly in an automation world and an automation phase where more and more things are going to become automated. But I do think that in the same way as you're saying that I notice AI slop online all the time, and so do I. I notice it a million miles. That's why I've stopped using AI to write. I don't write with it anymore because it just does my head in. But like in the same way, I can see a world where the quest to automate ends up with actually very average experiences, average to poor experiences. And therefore, the differentiator is not necessarily we're going to put you through to people, which I think some people think that might be the thing. I don't think it is. I think the differentiator will actually be this conversation was just like talking to a person. So above average from the point of view of it doesn't sound like a bot. It didn't just kind of give me what I wanted and got on with the day. It was actually a pleasure to interact with. I think that's kind of the sweet spot to try and get to, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's on certain use cases, some times in life you also want to talk to a human. You want to kind of get that personal experience. If you're a bank customer and you want to get a mortgage, for example, like you're buying a house, that's a pretty big decision to make. I would definitely envision that a lot of people still want to go maybe in physical offices and talk to the advisor, kind of get some advice and so on. So I think that's not going to go away. And I think to your point, probably we will want more of that in the future. But I still think there is going to be a race now in the market just to be able to be more, having a bit more of, say, AI native infrastructure to do those things. I think that's obviously with the transition we're going to see in the next couple of years, is that people need to transition to a bit more efficient way of working. Because remember, when the volumes just continue just increasing, you kind of increasing the cost. And another thing we're also seeing as a pretty big trend is now, like, with OpenClaw, like how the personal AI agent is going to be in the future, we don't really know. But we're already seeing that people are starting to use those agents to ask the bank for questions. Like maybe put in like a weekly schedule where you go in and ask 10 insurance company to get a better price, for example. So you will also, the consumer will also have AI. So that also means that the contact center now really need to invest in this, because how can they be ready for the future when everyone has their own AI, and then it doesn't really cost me any money to have my own voice bot to call your voice bot. So then you can imagine the volume is going to be massively increased in the future. So you also need to be able to be ready for that. Yeah,
I think that might happen sooner than we think as well. We did an event last, what was it, a couple of weeks ago anyway. Nick and Sherry on your side were there actually. And what we did is before the event, we called everybody with a voice AI agent trained on my voice. And so it was just sounded like me making them a phone call saying, "Hey, are you still coming? You got any dietary requirements?" Stuff like that. Okay, yes. Which was brilliant. It was a great kind of a great touch. But what was really interesting was that it was hitting call screening. On people's phones where it just doesn't answer, and it basically like an AI will just answer it for you, and it'll just screen the call. Who are you? What you're calling for? And so our voice AI was hitting people's call screening, telling them who it is and what I'm calling for. The call screening was going back to the person saying, "Hey, it's Kane calling about the event. He wants to know if you're going to turn up." That person then said, yeah, I'll be there. Their kind of call screening agent come back into the call and says, yeah, Jim will be there. And they was like, "Okay, brilliant. I'll mark him down as coming." And that was it. So it was like two agents talking to each other. So it's happening now,
Yeah, that's amazing.
So there we go. Brilliant. Well, Henry, this has been an absolute pleasure. Really, really great talking to you. Where can people go and find out more? Boost.ai, is it not?
Boost.ai, it's pretty simple.
Yeah. I'll also stick your LinkedIn down here if you're happy for people to
connect with me on LinkedIn if there's anything. Obviously, we're always happy to support. Again, there's a lot of questions around like, how do we do this? How do we get started? Like there's millions different types of questions you can ask. And we also know that a lot of organizations also have like different forces internally fighting for kind of like what AI initiative you want to do and so on. So we definitely spend a lot of time to kind of guide people also through that process. So you can make sure that you can show up to your boss, you can show up to your board and really have a successful project, because as we know, not every project is successful.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Henry, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kane.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you again on the next one.
Yeah,
Cheers.
yes.
Bye.